You're skipping breakfast. You've cut your portions. Some days, you're barely eating at all, and yet the scale won't move. Worse than that, you're more tired than ever. Your hands and feet feel colder. Your focus slips in the middle of the day. By evening, it's like your brain is wrapped in fog. And despite doing everything right, your body feels like it's working against you. Here's the part most people never hear. Your body is not broken. It's adapting. Quietly, intelligently, and very deliberately, it's shifting into a protective mode, a state designed not to help you burn fat, but to help you survive. And in that state, your metabolism doesn't speed up, it slows down. What I'm about to explain will change how you think about fasting forever, because the very thing you believe is accelerating fat loss may be signaling your body to conserve energy instead. And once that switch flips, everything from your energy to your results begins to change in ways most people completely miss. I'm Dr. Gunter, and over the past couple of decades, working with patients struggling with metabolic disorders, weight loss resistance, and the physiological effects of aging, I've seen this pattern play out more times than I can count. People come in doing everything they've been told is correct. They're fasting longer, eating less, pushing through hunger, and instead of feeling better, they feel worse. Their energy drops, their weight stalls. Some even start gaining fat again despite becoming more disciplined, not less. And what's striking is these aren't careless individuals. Many of them are well-informed, highly motivated, and genuinely committed to improving their health. But this is where things get complicated because the issue isn't effort, it's direction. This is something I've seen even very knowledgeable people misunderstand, not because they're uninformed, but because the way fasting is often presented oversimplifies what's actually happening inside the body. So I want to be very clear with you. I'm not here to tell you that fasting is bad or that you should stop. In the right context, it can be incredibly effective. But when it's applied in the wrong way or pushed beyond what your body can handle, it can quietly shift your physiology in the opposite direction of what you're trying to achieve. And most people don't realize it until they're already stuck. Most people operate on a very simple equation. Eat less and your body will burn more fat. On paper, that sounds logical. But biology doesn't work like a calculator. Because what I see over and over again in clinical practice is the opposite pattern. When the body senses that energy intake is too low for too long, it doesn't respond by accelerating fat loss. It responds by conserving energy. This is what we call metabolic adaptation. You might hear it described as a starvation response, but it's not dramatic or sudden. It's subtle, gradual, and incredibly efficient. Your body begins to downshift. It uses fewer calories to perform the same functions. Hormones that regulate hunger, energy, and fat burning begin to change. Even your spontaneous movement, things like fidgeting, posture, and general activity, starts to decrease without you realizing it. So while you believe you're creating a bigger deficit, your body is quietly shrinking the amount of energy it's willing to spend. And this is where intermittent fasting gets misunderstood. Fasting itself is not inherently good or bad. It's a tool. And like any tool, its effectiveness depends entirely on how it's used, how often, and what supports it. The real issue isn't that you're fasting, it's how your fasting is structured. And more importantly, how your body is being fueled around it. Because your body is not a passive system that simply burns whatever you withhold. It's an intelligent regulator. Its primary goal is survival, not fat loss. And if the signals you're sending suggest scarcity, especially over extended periods, it will adapt accordingly. Which means, without realizing it, you may be creating the exact conditions that slow your metabolism down. To really understand what's happening, you have to zoom out and look at how your body manages energy as a system, not as isolated parts, but as something coordinated and responsive. Start with your metabolic rate, what we call your basal metabolic rate, or BMR. Think of this as your baseline energy budget. It's the amount of energy your body needs just to keep the lights on: breathing, circulation, brain function, temperature regulation. Now imagine a company entering a financial downturn. What's the first thing it does? It cuts costs. It becomes more efficient. Your body does the same thing. When it senses that energy intake is consistently low, it reduces that baseline budget. It finds ways to do more with less. Next is your hormonal regulation system. This is your body's communication network. Hormones like thyroid T3, cortisol, leptin, and ghrelin are constantly sending signals, telling your body whether it's safe to burn energy or better to store it. If those signals start indicating stress or scarcity, the message shifts: conserve, hold on, slow things down. Then you have your muscle and mitochondrial system. Muscle tissue is your metabolic engine. It's one of the most energy-demanding tissues in the body. And inside those muscle cells are mitochondria, which act like tiny power plants generating usable energy. When energy availability drops, your body may start reducing investment in this system. Less muscle activity, less mitochondrial output. Again, all in the name of efficiency. And underlying all of this is what I call the energy availability signal. Your body is constantly asking one question: is there enough fuel coming in to support what I'm doing? It's like a thermostat or a power grid or even a fuel supply chain. If input drops, output gets adjusted. Now you understand why your body doesn't just burn fat because you eat less. Let's peel this back one layer at a time, because what's happening here isn't a single switch, it's a cascade. First, adaptive thermogenesis. When you restrict calories for too long, your body doesn't just lose weight, it becomes more efficient. It starts using less energy to perform the same tasks. Heat production drops, spontaneous movement declines, even internal processes become more economical. It's like dimming the lights in a building to conserve electricity. And this effect is even more pronounced as you get older. I see this frequently in patients over 50. Their bodies adapt faster and hold on to that lower metabolic state longer. Research consistently shows that metabolic rate can drop beyond what we'd expect just from eating less. That's your body actively conserving. Now layer in thyroid function, specifically T3. Think of T3 as your metabolic accelerator. It controls how quickly your body converts fuel into usable energy. When your system senses prolonged undereating, T3 production decreases, not because something is broken, but because your body is trying to slow everything down. The result? Energy feels harder to access. You feel colder. Fat loss becomes sluggish. Again, protective, not pathological. Next is cortisol. When you combine fasting with overall stress and insufficient fueling, cortisol levels can stay elevated. Cortisol is your emergency response hormone. It raises blood sugar to keep you functional, but it also shifts your body towards storing fat, especially around the abdomen. It's like your system saying, we're under threat, save resources. That's not a fat-burning environment. Then you have leptin and ghrelin, your hunger and satiety signals. As energy intake drops, leptin decreases. Your brain interprets that as starvation. At the same time, ghrelin increases, driving hunger higher. You start thinking about food more often. Cravings intensify. This isn't a lack of discipline. It's a biological push to restore balance. And over time, this can lead to rebound eating or persistent fatigue. Finally, muscle and mitochondria. When you're fasting without adequate protein or overall energy, your body may begin breaking down muscle tissue. And muscle isn't just about strength, it's one of your primary metabolic drivers. Inside muscle are mitochondria, the structures responsible for producing energy. Lose muscle and you lose mitochondrial capacity. It's like removing engines from a machine and expecting it to run at the same speed. It won't. And in some cases, when fasting is irregular and refeeding is inconsistent, insulin signaling becomes less stable. Fat burning turns on and off unpredictably, making progress feel inconsistent and frustrating. Each of these layers is your body trying to protect you. But together, they create a system that quietly resists fat loss while lowering your energy at the same time. Let me make this more concrete with what this looks like in real people, because this isn't theoretical. It shows up in clinic every week. One case was a 58-year-old woman who came in frustrated after months of strict intermittent fasting. She was regularly pushing 18 to 20-hour fasting windows, sometimes eating just one small meal a day. On paper, she was doing everything right, but her experience was the opposite. She felt constantly fatigued, her sleep was worsening, and despite her discipline, her weight had stalled. And most of what she noticed was increased abdominal fat. When we looked closer, the issue wasn't lack of effort, it was prolonged underfueling without structure. We didn't remove fasting entirely. Instead, we shortened her fasting window, increased protein intake, and focused on consistent nourishment during her eating period. Within a few weeks, her energy began to normalize, and over time, her body started responding again. Slow, steady fat loss without the constant exhaustion she had before. Another case was a 62-year-old man who had been skipping meals for convenience and unintentionally drifting into very low-calorie intake. He wasn't doing structured fasting, just eating less overall. He also wasn't doing any resistance training. Over time, he began noticing muscle loss, weakness, and a general feeling that his body was slowing down. What was happening underneath was a combination of muscle breakdown and reduced metabolic activity. We shifted his approach by introducing regular protein-rich meals and, importantly, adding simple strength training. Nothing extreme, just enough to signal his body to preserve muscle. Over the following months, his strength improved, his energy returned, and his metabolism became more responsive again. In both cases, the key wasn't eliminating fasting or restriction. It was correcting the biological signals being sent to the body. When we step back from individual cases and look at the broader scientific literature, these patterns are not controversial. They're well documented across metabolic research. For example, adaptive thermogenesis has been observed repeatedly in studies on prolonged calorie restriction. Researchers have shown that when energy intake drops significantly over time, resting metabolic rate can decrease beyond what would be expected from simple weight loss alone. In other words, the body becomes more efficient than the math predicts. This has been reported in controlled settings, including work referenced in metabolic and obesity journals and supported by institutions such as the National Institutes of Health. Thyroid function is another consistent finding. Studies on calorie restriction show reductions in T3, the active thyroid hormone responsible for regulating metabolic speed. When T3 levels drop, energy expenditure declines, and subjects often report symptoms like fatigue and cold intolerance. This is not a disease state, it's a regulated adaptation to lower energy availability. Cortisol also plays a clear role in this system. Chronic elevation of cortisol, particularly in the context of stress combined with undereating or irregular fasting, has been associated with increased central or visceral fat accumulation. This pattern has been repeatedly observed in both clinical endocrinology research and metabolic stress studies. It helps explain why some individuals lose weight unevenly or develop more abdominal fat despite eating less. And then there's muscle mass, which is one of the strongest predictors of metabolic rate. Across multiple studies, including work from academic centers like Harvard and other metabolic research institutions, higher lean muscle mass consistently correlates with higher resting energy expenditure. When muscle is lost, whether from inactivity, low protein intake, or prolonged energy restriction, metabolic rate declines as a direct consequence. Taken together, the research is remarkably consistent. The body is not a passive calorie burner. It is an adaptive system responding to energy availability, hormonal signals, and tissue demand in real time. So the practical question becomes, if the body adapts this intelligently, how do you work with it instead of against it? The first shift is structure. For most people stuck in fatigue or plateaus, extreme fasting windows like 18 to 20 hours are often too aggressive for long-term metabolic stability. A more sustainable approach is a consistent 16.8 pattern, an eating window that gives your body enough predictable fuel while still allowing time for fat utilization. The key isn't fasting harder, it's fasting more rhythmically. Within that eating window, the priority is adequate total intake, especially protein. This is non-negotiable if your goal is metabolic recovery. Protein signals safety to the body. It tells your system that muscle should be preserved, and by extension, metabolism should remain active. Foods like eggs, fish, and yogurt are particularly useful here because they provide both protein density and micronutrients that support hormonal function. Micronutrient support also matters more than people realize. Magnesium plays a role in energy production and stress regulation. B vitamins are directly involved in converting food into usable energy. Iron, when deficient, can quietly amplify fatigue and reduce metabolic efficiency. These aren't extras, they're cofactors your metabolism depends on. During fasting periods, hydration and electrolytes become essential. Without them, you increase physiological stress, which can push cortisol higher and reinforce that conservation state we discussed earlier. Then there's timing. Eating within a consistent daily window helps reestablish circadian rhythm alignment, your body's internal clock for digestion, hormone release, and energy expenditure. Irregular eating, by contrast, keeps the system in a constant state of uncertainty. Finally, resistance training 2 to 3 times per week is one of the strongest metabolic signals you can send. Muscle contraction tells the body, very directly, that tissue must be preserved. That preservation maintains mitochondrial density, which sustains energy output over time. Each of these steps works together. Nutrition provides fuel, protein preserves structure, timing restores rhythm, and training signals demand. When combined, they don't just prevent metabolic slowdown, they actively reverse it. Across all metabolic recovery cases, one thing becomes very important to understand. Change does not happen instantly. It happens in phases as the body gradually recalibrates its energy systems. In the first 7 days, the earliest shift is not fat loss, it's stabilization. Energy levels begin to even out. That constant sense of depletion starts to soften. Hunger signals, which may have felt chaotic or unpredictable, begin to normalize. This is your nervous system and hormonal signaling starting to resync with consistent fuel availability. Around the 3 to 4 week mark, deeper adaptations begin to emerge. This is where metabolism starts to recover its responsiveness. You may notice that workouts feel less draining, recovery improves, and your baseline energy is more stable throughout the day. Internally, your body is slowly increasing its willingness to spend energy again instead of conserving it. By 2 to 3 months, the changes become more visible and measurable. Fat loss begins to appear more consistently, not from extreme restriction, but from restored metabolic flexibility. This is the ability of the body to efficiently switch between using stored fat and dietary fuel. Strength also improves during this phase, which is a key indicator that muscle tissue and therefore metabolic activity is being preserved or rebuilt. What's important to emphasize is that this is not an instant transformation. It is not a quick hack or short-term fix. It is metabolic restoration. Your body is not being forced into change. It is being guided back into balance. And once that balance is restored, fat loss becomes less about pushing harder and more about your physiology finally working with you again instead of against you. Before anyone applies these principles, it's important to add a layer of responsibility and context. Intermittent fasting is not appropriate for everyone, and in some cases, it can do more harm than benefit if used without personalization. For individuals who are underweight or already struggling to maintain adequate body mass, extended fasting can further suppress energy availability and worsen fatigue or hormonal imbalance. Similarly, people with certain medical conditions, especially involving blood sugar regulation, thyroid disorders, or adrenal dysfunction, may respond unpredictably to prolonged fasting patterns. There is also an important consideration for anyone with a current or past history of eating disorders. Structured fasting can unintentionally reinforce restrictive patterns, and in those cases, it should be approached with extreme caution or avoided entirely unless guided by a qualified professional. The key point is this: metabolism is not something to force. It is something to understand and adapt to individual physiology. What works well for one person may create stress responses in another, even if the surface structure looks identical. So rather than treating fasting as a universal rule, it should be seen as one possible tool within a much broader metabolic framework. And ideally, any significant dietary strategy, especially one involving extended fasting, should be aligned with individual health status and, when necessary, discussed with a healthcare professional who understands metabolic physiology. If we pull everything together, the most important shift is not about fasting protocols or specific diets. It's about how we interpret what the body is doing in the first place. A slower metabolism, stalled fat loss, or persistent fatigue is very rarely a sign that the body is broken. In most cases, it is a sign that the body is doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect you under perceived conditions of scarcity. When energy intake is repeatedly too low, or when fasting is too aggressive for too long, the body doesn't interpret that as discipline or strategy. It interprets it as a potential survival threat. And in response, it reduces output, conserves energy, and prioritizes essential functions over fat loss. That's the key misunderstanding. The problem is not the body refusing to lose fat. The problem is the body responding appropriately to signals that suggest it shouldn't. So the real solution is not forcing greater restriction. It's restoring a sense of safety and predictability in the metabolic environment. Enough consistent energy, enough protein, enough recovery, and enough signal that resources are available. Because at its core, metabolism is not just a calorie equation. It is a communication system. And when that communication shifts from scarcity to stability, the physiology follows. So instead of thinking, how do I force more fat loss? The more accurate question becomes, how do I restore trust between my body and my environment so it no longer needs to conserve? Your body doesn't resist fat loss, it resists starvation. If you've been struggling with this, it's important to recognize something clearly. The effort you've been putting in is not the issue. Most people in this situation are actually doing the hard part. They're disciplined, consistent, and willing to make sacrifices. So when results don't match that effort, it creates frustration, even self-doubt. But what we've walked through shows a different picture. This is rarely about doing less or more. It's about doing things in a way that matches how your biology actually responds. There's nothing wrong with wanting structure or using fasting as a tool. The key is making sure it's not pushing your system into a state of prolonged scarcity without balance. When you shift from forcing outcomes to understanding signals, everything becomes more stable: energy, mood, and long-term fat loss. If this helped clarify things for you, it may be worth reflecting on where your current approach feels aligned and where it may be creating resistance without you realizing it. And if you know someone stuck in the same cycle, doing everything right but getting nowhere, this might be something worth sharing with them.